The neighborhood looked calm from the outside. Beautiful houses, clean streets, small gardens, and children playing, it all seemed peaceful. But anyone who lived there knew the truth. Behind the silence, behind the smiles, behind the friendly wave of neighbors, there was always tension, because of one person. Her name was Karen. She was not just any neighbor. She was a member of the HOA committee, and she believed that made her the ruler of the entire community. People didn't call her Karen for no reason. They called her that because she complained about everything. She argued about everything. And she believed everything should be done her way or no way at all. Some people avoided her. Some ignored her. Some prayed she wouldn't walk toward them with another rule, another warning, or another threat. But one person always ended up in her target, again and again. His name was Daniel. Daniel lived in the house right next to hers. He kept to himself, minded his own business, and tried to stay peaceful. But Karen? She saw him as her personal enemy. She didn't like how he cut his grass. She didn't like how he parked his car. She didn't like the color of his flowers. She didn't like how he breathed, it seemed. And every time something bothered her, she didn't complain to the HOA. She called 911. She used emergency services like her personal weapon anytime she wanted power, anytime she wanted fear, anytime she wanted attention. Police sirens had become a common sound in the peaceful street. Neighbors would peek through their windows, whispering, "Oh no, she's calling again, what is it this time?" People were sick of it. But they were also scared of her. Because Karen knew how to act. She knew how to cry. She knew how to scream. She knew how to make a small problem look like a crime scene. But today, everything was about to change. The story begins on a warm afternoon. The sun was shining, birds were singing, and Daniel stood outside his house, watering the plants near his porch. It was a normal, simple activity, nothing special. He hummed softly, thinking about his day, planning to fix a broken shelf inside his home later. He liked quiet days like this. But quiet days almost never lasted. Not with Karen around. Inside her house, Karen stood by her window, watching Daniel like a hawk. Her eyes narrowed. She didn't like that Daniel had planted new flowers last week. She said the colors did not match the neighborhood standard. She didn't like that he didn't ask for her approval. She believed she deserved respect, power, and control. She couldn't stand the sight of him being relaxed. She couldn't stand the thought that he didn't fear her. She needed to remind him who she thought she was. She opened her door and stepped outside, fast, loud, dramatic, just the way she liked to enter every situation. "Daniel," she shouted. Daniel stopped watering and looked up slowly. He already knew this tone. He already knew this voice. But he stayed polite. "Yes, Karen," he asked. "You are breaking HOA rules," she said, crossing her arms. Daniel blinked. "I'm just watering my plants." Karen stepped closer, her voice rising. "You planted the wrong type of flowers. I told you last week that pink roses are against the guidelines." Daniel sighed gently. "Karen, there is no rule about flower colors." "There is now," she snapped. "I added it myself." Daniel tried not to roll his eyes. "You can't just make up rules by yourself. HOA rules have to be approved." Karen's face tightened. She hated being corrected. She hated not having the final word. Her breathing quickened, and her voice turned sharp and shaky, like she was preparing for a performance. "You are threatening me," she suddenly said. Daniel stared at her, confused. "I'm threatening you? How? I haven't done anything." Karen took a small step backward, the kind of step someone takes when acting scared for attention. "If you come any closer," she said loudly, "I will call 911. Daniel didn't even move. "Karen, please stop. You do this every week." Karen raised her chin proudly. "And I will do it again." Then she pulled out her phone. Daniel felt his stomach drop. "Karen, don't. But she had already dialed. She walked away from Daniel, pacing back and forth in her yard, pretending to cry, pretending to shake, pretending to be terrified. Her voice echoed across the whole neighborhood. "Hello, 911? I need help. My neighbor is threatening me. He's aggressive, he's yelling, he won't stop. I'm scared for my life." Inside their homes, neighbors froze. Again? She's lying. This has to stop. But nobody came outside yet. They knew from experience Karen loved an audience, and if they stepped out too early, she would pull them into the drama too. Daniel stood still, holding his water hose, looking tired, frustrated, and helpless. He knew what would happen next. Sirens. Flashing lights. Questions. Wasted time. Embarrassment. And he knew Karen would pretend to be a victim the whole time. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath. "She's doing it again," he whispered to himself. A few minutes passed, then the familiar sound broke the peaceful afternoon. Police sirens. They grew louder. Closer. Stronger. Daniel's heart beat a little faster, not because he was afraid of the police, but because he didn't want to be in the middle of another fake emergency. He didn't want trouble. He didn't want drama. He just wanted a peaceful life. Karen, however, looked excited. She stood near her driveway, waving her arms dramatically as the police car stopped in front of the houses. "They're here," she whispered to herself, almost smiling. "Finally someone will listen to me." Two officers stepped out, serious, alert, ready for trouble. Karen ran to them before they could even shut their doors. "Officers. Thank you for coming," she yelled, pointing aggressively at Daniel. "He threatened me. He came at me. I'm scared he will hurt me." Daniel stood calmly, water hose hanging loosely in his hand. He didn't speak. He knew interrupting her would only make things worse. The officers looked between Karen and Daniel, trying to understand the situation. Something felt off. Karen's behavior was too dramatic, too loud, too emotional. Daniel looked calm, too calm for someone accused of being violent. The tension in the street became heavy. Neighbors silently opened their curtains, watching. Everyone waited to see what the police would do. But the officers had noticed something Karen didn't. On the corner of Daniel's house, a small blinking light. A security camera. And that tiny detail would soon change everything. After the police arrived and Karen finished her dramatic performance in the middle of the street, something strange happened. The neighborhood, which usually stayed silent during her scenes, suddenly felt heavier, like the air itself was tired of her. But Karen wasn't tired. No, she was just getting started. The story of Karen's drama went far beyond one phone call. It was a pattern. A cycle. A weekly routine that everyone in the neighborhood knew too well. And it always began the same way. With Karen waking up in the morning and scanning the street like a security guard on night duty. Every day, Karen would stand at her living room window, cup of tea in hand, eyes sharp like a hawk. She didn't look at the sunrise or admire the calm mornings. She looked for mistakes. She looked for problems. She looked for reasons to feel powerful. Her eyes moved from one house to another. A car parked slightly too close to the sidewalk? A trash bin not pulled in by 9 a.m.? Grass that grew 1 inch too tall? Karen saw everything. And each time she saw something wrong, she whispered to herself. "Unacceptable, they are breaking rules. I must take action." She didn't wait for anyone to ask for her opinion. She didn't care if the rule wasn't even real. In her mind, she was the HOA. But the truth was simple. Karen didn't want order. She wanted control. Across the street, Daniel lived a very different life. He liked quiet mornings. He liked peace. He liked minding his own business. He tried not to get involved with anyone. He kept his yard clean, his home tidy, and his routine simple. But no matter what he did, no matter how carefully he lived, He always became Karen's target. Not because he was doing anything wrong, but because Karen couldn't control him. And nothing made Karen angrier than a person she couldn't control. One morning, a few weeks before the 911 incident, Daniel was sitting on his porch drinking coffee. He had just started reading a book when he heard footsteps. He didn't even need to look up. He already knew who it was. Karen stood on the edge of his yard, holding a clipboard like some kind of officer. "Good morning, Daniel," she said in a tone that didn't sound like a greeting at all. "Do you have a moment?" Daniel placed his book down slowly. "What is it now, Karen?" She flipped through her clipboard dramatically. "Your grass is half an inch over the allowed height." Daniel blinked. "Karen, there's no allowed height." "There is," she said proudly, tapping the papers. "I wrote it myself and placed it in the community mailbox." "That's not how rules work," Daniel said calmly. Karen's eyes narrowed, offended by his calmness. "You are resisting HOA authority," she declared. Daniel rubbed his forehead. "Karen, you can't create rules without approval." Karen raised her voice. "I can if I know what is best for this community." Her voice echoed across the street. Lights turned on in houses. Curtains moved as neighbors peeked outside. But nobody came out. Everyone had learned their lesson long ago. When Karen was in the middle of one of her audits, it was best to stay invisible. This wasn't just a one-time issue. Karen had a list, a long one, of things she wanted changed in the neighborhood. She didn't like blue cars. She didn't like loud laughter. She didn't like people barbecuing on weekends. She didn't like kids leaving chalk drawings on the sidewalk. She even complained that birds sitting on fences were too noisy. One time, she stood in the middle of the street yelling at a neighbor because their wind chimes disturbed the harmony of the environment. Another time, she made a teenager cry because he parked his bicycle incorrectly. She loved being the center of attention. She loved the feeling of authority. She loved when people were scared of her. But there was one thing she loved more than anything: calling 911. For Karen, 911 was a magic button. A button she pressed any time she didn't get her way. A button that made her feel powerful. She didn't care that it wasted emergency resources. She didn't care that real people needed help. She didn't care that her reports were lies. She only cared that when police arrived, she felt important. Each time she called, she used the same emotional tricks. Fake tears. Fake shaking. Fake fear. Fake stories. She had done it so many times that even the police officers recognized her voice before she said her name. Some officers whispered to each other, "Oh, it's her again. Another false alarm? Why does she keep doing this?" But because 911 was serious, they always had to respond. Even if they suspected she was lying. And every time officers arrived, Karen felt victorious. Until the day Daniel installed security cameras. Karen hated those cameras. She hated them because they saw the truth. They recorded her lies. They captured proof. She once tried to report the cameras as illegal surveillance devices, but the HOA president himself told her, "Karen, please stop. Those cameras are allowed." That day, she slammed her door so hard the windows rattled. Back to the present moment after the latest 911 call, Daniel stood quietly while police questioned Karen, but his mind was somewhere else. He remembered every complaint she ever made. Every false accusation. Every time she put him through stress. He wasn't angry. He was just tired. Tired of living next to a walking storm. Tired of being treated like a criminal for nothing. Tired of Karen using police like a personal tool. But something inside him felt different today. Maybe it was the way the officers looked at Karen. Maybe it was the way the neighbors were watching from behind their curtains. Maybe it was the security camera blinking quietly above his porch. For the first time, it felt like the story would not end the way Karen expected. For the first time, the officers didn't rush to Daniel. They didn't grab their notepads. They didn't treat him like a suspect. They just watched Karen. They watched her over-the-top behavior. They watched her dramatic hand movements. They watched her fake tears that appeared too quickly. And they looked doubtful. Karen didn't notice. She was too busy performing. "Officers, please, you have to do something," she cried loudly. "He scared me." He came at me with something in his hand. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "You mean the water hose?" Karen gasped. "See? He admits it." One officer sighed. "Ma'am, a water hose is not a weapon." Karen froze. For the first time, she didn't have a comeback. And Daniel noticed something important. The officer's eyes flicked toward the camera. Karen still hadn't realized that her lies were about to break apart. Piece by piece. Layer by layer. Truth against performance. For years, she used 911 like a weapon. But today, that weapon was about to turn against her. The police car lights painted the quiet street in flashes of red and blue. Most houses had their curtains slightly open, eyes secretly watching. Everyone had seen Karen call the police before, but today felt different. The air was thicker. The silence had weight. Something was coming. Daniel stood on his lawn, the water hose resting softly in his hand, water dripping onto the grass. He wasn't scared, he was tired. Tired of being accused of things he didn't do. Tired of Karen's games. Tired of living in a neighborhood where peace never lasted. But he stayed calm. He always did. The officers walked up, stopping between Karen and Daniel. Before they could speak, Karen rushed forward like a storm that had been waiting to explode. "Officers! You're finally here!" "I thought he was going to hurt me," she cried, pointing at Daniel with trembling fingers. One officer asked, "Ma'am, what exactly happened?" Karen took a dramatic breath, loud enough for the whole street to hear. "He came at me," she said. "He ran toward me with something dangerous. I feared for my life." She looked over her shoulder at the neighbors' windows, making sure they were watching her performance. They were. But not in the way she wanted. One neighbor whispered behind the curtain. "She's lying again. I saw everything." Another whispered. "She's losing it." But Karen only saw attention. And she loved attention. Daniel kept his voice steady. "Officers, I didn't run toward anyone. I was watering my plants." Karen snapped, "That's a lie." The officer turned to her. "Ma'am, did he say anything threatening?" "Yes." Karen said instantly. He said he would show me what happens to rule breakers." Daniel frowned. "I never said that." "You did." Karen yelled. The officer raised a calm hand. Okay. We'll figure this out." Another officer looked at Daniel and asked, "Sir, did the two of you have an argument before we arrived?" Daniel sighed. "She starts arguments. Every week." Karen gasped loudly. "See? He admits it. He hates me." "I don't hate anyone," Daniel said. "But I'm allowed to water my plants." Karen's face twisted. She didn't want calmness. She didn't want logic. She wanted chaos, panic, drama, things that made her feel powerful. "You're dangerous," she shouted. "He has been making me uncomfortable for months." "Because I water my plants?" Daniel asked. Karen pointed dramatically at the hose in his hand. That is what he threatened me with." The officer blinked slowly, almost confused. "Ma'am, it's a garden hose." Karen raised her voice even higher. "He swung it at me. Violently." Daniel didn't argue. He didn't need to. The officers already looked suspicious of her. Then Karen's voice changed, softer, lower, shakier. She pressed her hands against her chest, pretending to hold back tears. I just want to feel safe in my own neighborhood, she whispered. And he scares me every single day. Daniel almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because the lie was so ridiculous. But he stayed serious. One officer leaned closer to Karen. Ma'am, did he make any physical movement toward you? Karen nodded dramatically. Yes. He walked toward me, very fast. Daniel blinked. I didn't move. You did. Karen insisted. I saw your shadow. One officer wrote something on his notepad, but Karen couldn't tell what. She thought they were writing down evidence for her side. She didn't notice their doubtful expressions. She didn't notice their tired eyes. She didn't notice the small shakes of their heads. Because Karen believed her lies the same way a child believes in magic. The officer closest to Daniel looked at the water still dripping onto the ground. Sir, he asked, is there any reason she would feel threatened? Daniel looked him straight in the eye. Because I don't let her control me. Karen gasped harder than before, clutching her chest. Control? Control? How dare you say something like that? I am on the HOA committee. Exactly, Daniel said calmly. It was like pressing a button inside Karen's mind. Her face turned red. Her eyes widened. She shook her head violently. You don't respect authority, she cried. I respect real authority, Daniel said. Not fake rules. Karen opened her mouth to argue again, but something caught her attention. One of the officers was no longer looking at Daniel. He wasn't looking at Karen either. He was looking at the security camera. The tiny red light blinked quietly, almost like it was watching the drama unfold with amusement. Karen saw where his eyes went. Her whole body tensed. She swallowed once. Then again. Her confidence slipped just a little. Is that camera recording? The officer asked. Yes, Daniel said instantly. Karen forced a smile. It must be broken. Cameras break all the time. No, Daniel said, it's brand new. Installed last month. Karen laughed nervously. Well, I'm sure it didn't capture anything important. The other officer tilted his head. Why are you sure of that, ma'am? Karen froze. For the first time since the police arrived, she didn't have a line. No lie. No excuse. No fake tears. Just silence. The officers stepped aside and whispered to each other. Karen tried to lean closer to hear, but every time she moved, they shifted slightly away from her. Daniel stood still, hands in front of him, waiting patiently. He looked tired, but not scared. He looked like someone who had been through this too many times to feel anything at all. After a moment, the officer walked back toward them. Ma'am, he said, we need to view the footage. Karen's eyes widened. She took a step back. Footage? Why? I already told you everything. Daniel calmly pointed to the camera. It recorded everything. It will clear this up. Karen shook her head rapidly. You don't need that. I gave you the truth. I swear. The officer raised an eyebrow. If your report is accurate, the footage will support it. Karen's voice cracked. What if the camera angle isn't good? It's enough, the officer said firmly. Karen's breathing quickened. Her hands trembled, not in a fake way this time, but in real fear. Real fear of the truth. Because for the first time ever, her weapon 911 wasn't working. Her lies were slipping. Her performance was cracking. Her confidence was breaking. And Daniel wasn't the one under investigation anymore. She was. The officer turned toward Daniel. Sir, may we review the footage? Of course, Daniel said. Karen blurted out, no. You can't. Both officers turned toward her slowly. And why not? One asked. Karen opened her mouth. Then closed it. She finally realized something she had never faced before. This time, she was the suspect. And the truth would expose everything. The flashing police lights were still bouncing off the windows when the officers asked to see the footage. A heavy silence spread across the street. It felt like the whole neighborhood was holding its breath. Karen stood frozen in her yard. For years she had controlled the neighborhood with her voice, her threats, her rules, her fake emergencies. But now, her biggest fear stood in front of her. Proof. Daniel nodded calmly to the officers and motioned for them to follow him. This way, he said. The officers walked with him toward the front door. Their steps were slow and steady, like the footsteps of two men who already suspected the truth. Karen followed a few steps behind, her body stiff, her face pale, her breath quick and shaky. She didn't want to follow. But she also didn't want to be left alone. She wanted to hear what they would say, what they would see. She wanted to stay in control. Even though she was losing it. Inside Daniel's living room, everything looked peaceful and neatly arranged. A small table, a couch, a bookshelf, and a TV. But the most important thing in the room wasn't furniture. It was the small monitor on the wall. The one connected to the security cameras. Daniel picked up the remote and clicked a button. The screen lit up. Karen took a step backward as if the light itself burned her. One officer stood behind Daniel, arms crossed. The other stood beside the monitor, watching closely. Okay, Daniel said. This is today's recording. He rewound the video to 10 minutes earlier. The screen showed the quiet street. Daniel watering his plants. Birds flying. Nothing unusual. Then Karen appeared on the top corner of the video, walking toward Daniel with fast, angry steps. The officer leaned closer. Karen opened her mouth. This camera angle is not good. It doesn't show everything. The officer didn't respond. He didn't need to. His eyes were focused on the truth. On the screen, Karen could be seen shouting. Daniel could be seen turning off the water hose, stepping slightly back, and speaking calmly. Then the moment Karen claimed he charged at her appeared on the screen, except there was nothing like that. Daniel stood completely still. He didn't move toward her, not even one step. The officers saw everything clearly. Karen's voice cracked. No, this is wrong. The camera must be broken. You already said it wasn't broken earlier, the officer reminded her. Karen opened her mouth. Then closed it again. The officers continued watching. Then came the most important part. The part Karen prayed wouldn't show. Her pulling out her phone. Her dialing 911. Her pacing back and forth. Her pretending to cry. Her shouting loudly even though Daniel wasn't talking to her. And finally, her pointing at Daniel dramatically as the police car approached. The air in the room turned colder. The truth sat in the space like a stone. Karen's face turned red, then pale, then red again. She tried to laugh, a weak, nervous, broken laugh. This is taken out of context, she whispered. The officer crossed his arms. Ma'am, what context exactly do you mean? Karen opened and closed her hands like she didn't know where to place them. I felt scared. I thought he was going to, she paused, searching for a lie, a story, anything. But her voice betrayed her. Her breathing betrayed her. Her eyes betrayed her. She couldn't think fast enough this time. There is nothing here, the officer said slowly, that supports your emergency call. Karen's hands shook. But I felt threatened. Feelings matter. The second officer spoke for the first time in several minutes. Ma'am, 911 is for real emergencies. Not feelings. Karen's eyes widened. Are you calling me a liar? We are calling your report false, the officer replied. Silence. A deep, heavy silence. Karen stepped forward, pointing at the screen like she could intimidate the video itself. You don't understand. He disrespects me. He ignores HOA rules. He doesn't listen when I speak. The officer raised an eyebrow. Ma'am, none of those are crimes. But, Karen sputtered. Calling 911 with a knowingly false emergency is, he added. Karen took a step back as if he had physically pushed her. What are you saying? She whispered. Daniel watched quietly. He didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply watched the officers deal with the situation, something he had wished for many times. The officer spoke calmly, but his voice was firm. Ma'am, we've received multiple calls from this address before. Many from you. Most were exaggerated or completely false. Today, we have video proof. Karen swallowed hard. Her eyes darted from the officer, to the screen, to Daniel, back to the officer. She looked trapped. Like a cornered animal trying to find a way out. But every direction she looked was a dead end. I didn't mean to. I didn't think. I didn't. She stumbled over her own words. The officer took out a small booklet from his pocket. Ma'am, you could be charged for misuse of emergency services. Do you understand that? Karen's face drained of color. She grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. Her voice came out small, unlike her usual loud self. Are you arresting me? The officer didn't answer immediately. He looked at Daniel. Sir, he asked, do you want to press charges? Karen's mouth fell open. She turned toward Daniel with disbelief. You can't, she gasped. Daniel, you can't do that. I live here. I am HOA. I was just trying to keep the neighborhood safe. Daniel didn't rush. He took a moment. He breathed in. Then he said, I just want peace. I want her to stop lying. Stop calling 911 on people. Stop creating problems. Karen shook her head frantically. Daniel, no. Don't do this. They can't arrest me, I'm the one who makes the rules here. Karen, one officer said tiredly, you don't make the laws. But I. Her voice trembled. Her hands trembled. The officer finally answered her earlier question. We're not arresting you yet, he said. But we're filing a formal report. And the district attorney will decide whether charges should be brought. Misuse of 911 is a serious crime. Karen stumbled back again. She felt something she had never felt before. Consequences. Daniel turned off the monitor. The video ended. But Karen's story wasn't over. Because the next step would change everything. And for the first time in her life, Karen realized. Her lies had limits. And she had finally crossed them. The monitor went dark, but the silence it left behind was louder than any siren. Karen stood in the middle of Daniel's living room like a statue, frozen, stiff, and confused. For the first time, her words held no power. Her performance had failed. Her tears had fallen flat. The truth shone brighter than her lies. The two officers exchanged a quiet glance, the kind of glance that said everything without saying anything at all. They didn't need to discuss it, they both understood the situation perfectly. Karen had crossed a line. A line she had crossed many times before. But this time, there was proof. Officer Reed, the older of the two, closed his notebook slowly. He had been dealing with difficult calls for nearly 15 years, but something about Karen made him tired in a way he couldn't explain. He turned to her. Ma'am, he said with a steady voice, we have clear evidence that you filed a false 911 report. Karen's head snapped up. No. No, you don't understand. It looked different from my angle. It felt threatening. Officer Reed shook his head. Your feelings don't match reality. Karen blinked fast, her mouth hanging open. Officer James, the younger officer, stepped forward. Ma'am, this isn't just one mistake. We have records of your past calls. Many of them were questionable. Karen's face twisted with panic. Questionable? I am a responsible citizen. I look after this neighborhood. I make sure everyone follows the standards. Daniel's voice stayed calm, almost too calm. Karen, looking after the neighborhood doesn't mean lying to police. Karen spun toward him with wild eyes. You stay out of this. Daniel didn't respond. He didn't need to. Her reaction said everything. Officer Reed walked to the front door and opened it slightly. The warm air from outside carried murmurs, neighbors whispering from their porches and windows, watching the drama unfold like a live show. They weren't hiding their curiosity anymore. Not tonight. Even Mr. Turner, the quiet old man who rarely spoke to anyone, stood behind his screen door, shaking his head slowly. Karen saw them. She saw all the eyes watching her. And for once, she didn't like the attention. Not this kind. She whispered to herself, they're all against me. But this time, no one argued with her. Officer James stood in front of her. Ma'am, we have two options. You can cooperate with the investigation, or we can take this further. Karen's voice cracked. Further? What do you mean further? We can take you in for questioning, he said plainly. False reporting, making up threats, wasting emergency resources, these are not small things. Karen froze. Her breath hitched. Her fingers curled tightly around the strap of her purse. You can't arrest me, she stammered. I am HOA. Daniel rubbed his forehead. Even he had trouble stopping a laugh at that one. Officer Reed closed the door again and looked her straight in the eyes. HOA is not above the law. Karen's mouth opened, but before she could respond, a voice came from outside. Officer! Wait! Everyone in the room turned their heads. It was Mrs. Henderson, one of the oldest residents in the neighborhood. She walked up the driveway with slow steps, but her presence was strong. Her hair was silver, her posture was straight, and she carried herself like someone who had seen more life than the rest of them combined. Karen whispered under her breath, No, not her. Mrs. Henderson stepped into the living room doorway, the officers politely making space for her. I heard the commotion, she said gently. And I think you need to know something. Karen stepped backward. Mrs. Henderson, this is none of your business. But the older woman didn't even look at her. Instead, she looked at the officers with calm, wise eyes. She has done this for years, she said softly. Not just with Daniel. With all of us. The room fell even quieter. Daniel looked at her with surprise. Officer Reed asked, Can you explain, ma'am? Mrs. Henderson nodded. Yes. I can. She pointed at Karen, slowly, sadly, as if pointing at someone who had disappointed her for years. She called 911 on me once, she said. Said I was violently blocking the road when I was just trying to cross the street with my walker. Karen's face twisted. That's not true. You were moving too slow. Mrs. Henderson continued, ignoring her. She called 911 on the Johnsons because their dog barked twice in one afternoon. Officer James raised his eyebrows. Twice? Mrs. Henderson nodded. And she called the police on the Brown family because their barbecue smoke was attacking her lungs. Daniel covered his mouth to hide a smile. Mrs. Henderson added, and don't forget the time she said the mailman looked suspicious. She caused so much trouble they had to change his route. The officers exchanged glances again, more serious this time. But Mrs. Henderson wasn't finished. She scares children. She insults neighbors. She stands at her window like a security camera with legs, waiting for someone to breathe wrong. We are tired. We are all tired. Karen spun around, her voice frantic. Why are you all turning against me? I keep order. I protect this place. Mrs. Henderson shook her head slowly. No, Karen. You terrorize this place. Silence. Heavy, heartbreaking silence. Karen's hands fell to her sides. Officer Reed took a step toward her. Ma'am, after hearing this, and with the evidence we have no choice. Karen's lips trembled. What do you mean? Officer James spoke clearly. We're issuing a citation today. And we will be forwarding this case to the district attorney. Karen breathed fast, panicked. A case? But I didn't do anything. I'm the victim. Officer Reed pointed gently toward the monitor. The video says otherwise. Karen covered her ears, shaking her head. No. I won't accept this. You can't do this to me. Daniel whispered, Karen, this is what happens when you lie. Karen's eyes filled with real tears. Not the fake dramatic ones she used for years. But real fear. Real fear of real consequences. And for the first time ever, the neighborhood wasn't scared of Karen. Karen was scared of the truth. The officers stepped closer. Karen stepped backward. The truth was out. Her lies were collapsing. Her power was gone. And the next moment would decide everything. Karen stood cornered, like a wild animal trapped in a small space she once believed she controlled. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps. Her eyes darted between the officers, Daniel, and Mrs. Henderson, each one silently judging her, each one a witness to her fall. It felt unreal. No, it felt impossible. Karen had always believed she was untouchable. She believed her opinions were law. Her words were truth. Her complaints were orders. But now? Her words were evidence. Her complaints were crimes. And her truth was unraveling faster than she could speak. Officer Reed sighed as he reached for the small black device clipped to his vest. His voice was calm, almost gentle, but firm enough to leave no room for argument. Ma'am, we need you to remain still. Karen panicked. Still? Why? What are you doing? Officer James stepped forward, keeping his tone soft. We need a formal statement from you. And we need one from Mr. Daniel as well. This won't take long if everyone cooperates. Karen blinked. Oh, formal statement? Her mind raced. She had expected handcuffs. She had expected shouting. She had expected humiliation. But a statement? That's right, Officer James continued. You and Mr. Daniel will both be recorded. You will explain why you called 911. He will explain what actually happened. Karen swallowed hard. That didn't sound like arrest. That sounded like a chance. A chance to twist the story again. A chance to save herself. She straightened her back. This is my opportunity, she thought. I can fix this. I can make myself the victim again. But the officers weren't done. Officer Reed added firmly, but before the statement, we have one more thing to do. Karen froze. What thing? Both officers turned to Daniel. Mr. Daniel, Officer Reed said, we are temporarily issuing you a copy of the incident report and giving you the option to file a harassment complaint. Karen's mouth dropped open. What? Him? File what? Daniel didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He didn't throw any victory lines. He only asked calmly. What does that mean, exactly? Officer James answered, it means that if you choose, we can open a formal case about repeated harassment, false accusations, and targeted 911 misuse. Karen's knees nearly buckled. No, this isn't happening. She grabbed onto the wall to steady herself. I'm the one who files complaints, she hissed under her breath. Not them. Not them. But her whisper wasn't quiet enough. Mrs. Henderson heard it. The older woman folded her arms. Karen, for years you hurt people with your accusations. You created chaos and fear in a peaceful neighborhood. And now that the truth is here, you can't accept it. Karen stared at her with trembling lips. I keep order. No, Mrs. Henderson said, "You break it." Daniel looked at the officers thoughtfully. "Officer Reed." "Officer James, if I file this complaint, what happens?" Officer Reed sighed. "An investigation begins. If enough evidence shows a pattern, and based on what we've seen, it does, she may face fines, mandatory counseling, or even temporary restrictions from using emergency services." Karen's jaw hung open. "Temporary, what? Restrictions? On me? On me?" Officer James continued, "It's not punishment. It's protection for the community." Karen's voice cracked into a scream. "I am the community." Daniel lowered his eyes. "No, Karen, you're just one person." She felt something break inside her chest, something heavy, something ugly, something she never wanted anyone to see. Control. Her control was slipping. And she didn't know how to survive without it. Officer Reed lifted his hand gently. "All right. Let's calm things down. First, the statements." He motioned for Daniel to step outside with Officer James. Karen's eyes widened. "No, no, no. You cannot let him go first. He's going to twist everything." Officer Reed turned to her. "Ma'am, he doesn't seem like the one twisting anything today." Karen's mouth opened, but no sound came out. She watched Daniel step out with the officer, walking calmly like a man who no longer had anything to fear. That hurt her more than anything. She wanted him scared. She wanted him weak. She wanted him guilty. But he walked away free, while she stood trapped in her own lies. As the door closed behind Daniel and Officer James, Karen found herself alone with Officer Reed and Mrs. Henderson. The room felt colder now. Smaller. Like the walls were closing in around her. Officer Reed looked at her with a tired but sincere expression. "Karen," he said slowly, "I want to understand something." She blinked, confused. "Understand what?" He asked the one question she never expected. "Why do you do this?" Her breath halted. Not "what happened tonight?" Not "why did you lie?" Not "do you know this is illegal?" No. He asked her something deeper. Something she wasn't ready to answer. She hesitated. What do you mean?" Officer Reed softened his voice even more, the way a doctor might talk to someone who didn't want to hear the diagnosis. "You call 911 again and again. You accuse people without reason. You create fear, even when there is no danger. Why?" Karen looked away. Her throat tightened. She felt something inside her, something she refused to name, twisting painfully. Mrs. Henderson watched her with a mixture of sadness and disappointment. "This is your chance, Karen," the older woman whispered gently. "Tell the truth, at least once." Karen clenched her fists. Tears, real ones this time, stung her eyes. "I do it," she whispered shakily, because if I don't control everything, I feel like I'm losing everything." The words surprised even her. Mrs. Henderson stepped closer. "Karen, you were never supposed to carry everything alone." But Karen shook her head violently. "No. No. You don't understand. If I don't keep people in line, the neighborhood falls apart. People break rules. They disrespect the standards. They ruin everything." Officer Reed spoke softly. "And calling 911 was your way to keep control?" She nodded slowly, tears dripping now. "Yes, because when I call, they listen. They take me seriously. They respect me." Officer Reed stared at her with sad eyes. "That's not respect, Karen. That's fear. And fear doesn't last forever." Karen's breath trembled. For the first time, she truly felt it. The weight of being wrong. The weight of being seen. The weight of losing control. And the worst part? There was still more coming. More consequences. More truth. More exposure. Because Daniel was outside giving the real story. And when he returned, nothing would be the same. The door opened, and Daniel walked back inside. His expression was calm, steady, almost relieved, like someone who had finally taken a weight off his shoulders. Karen saw him. Her chest tightened. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't shaking. He wasn't afraid of her anymore. And that scared her more than anything the officers could do. Officer James followed him in and nodded at Officer Reed. "Statement from Daniel is complete," he said. Clear, detailed, consistent with the video. The words hit Karen like cold water. Consistent with the video. Clear. Detailed. Everything she wasn't. Officer Reed turned toward her. "Ma'am, now it's your turn." Karen swallowed hard. Her throat felt dry, like she had swallowed chalk. She tried to stand tall, but her legs felt weak. Officer Reed gently guided her to a chair. "Please sit." She obeyed, not because she wanted to, but because she had no fight left. Her confidence had collapsed. Her voice, once loud and commanding, now trembled like a leaf in the wind. Officer James placed a recorder on the table between them. "State your name," he said. Karen inhaled deeply. Karen Whitfield." "Now," Officer Reed said calmly, "tell us exactly what you saw that made you call 911. "Exactly." That was the painful word. Because exactly was something she could not control. Exactly meant the truth. Exactly meant no drama, no exaggeration, no power. She stared at the recorder. Heat crept up her neck. I thought Daniel was a threat." Officer James raised an eyebrow. "Based on what?" Karen's voice cracked. He was standing in his driveway. And he looked annoyed. Daniel blinked. "Annoyed?" "Karen, you were yelling at me." Officer Reed cleared his throat. "Please continue, ma'am." Karen took a shaky breath. "I told him the lawn standards were not being met." Officer Reed asked, "And was he doing anything dangerous?" She hesitated. Every part of her brain screamed to invent something. To create a story. To make herself the hero again. But the camera footage. The witnesses. The officers. She had no escape. "No," she whispered. "He wasn't." "And when you called 911, Officer James asked, leaning in, did you tell the dispatcher he looked threatening?" Karen's lip trembled. "Yes. But you just said he wasn't dangerous." Silence. Painful. Exposing. Deadly. Karen stared at the floor. I panicked." Daniel whispered, "You panicked every week for a year?" Karen squeezed her eyes shut. "I panicked because I didn't want to lose control." Officer Reed wrote something down. Mrs. Henderson let out a long, sad sigh. "Karen," she said softly, "control is not safety. Control is not community. Control is not respect." Karen felt the sting in her chest again. She wiped her cheeks. But the tears kept coming. And then, the twist came. Officer James stepped away from the recorder. His expression had changed. He was no longer neutral. No longer simply doing his job. Now he looked concerned. Worried even. "Ma'am," he began carefully, "we reviewed your past calls with dispatch." Karen's head snapped up. "How many?" she asked with fear. Officer Reed answered, 37. Her mouth fell open. 37? That's impossible. He cut her off gently. "You made 37 non-emergency calls to 911 this year. Most of them were about your neighbors. All unnecessary. All exaggerated." Karen's heartbeat thundered in her ears. 37. 37 times she used fear as her weapon. 37 times she demanded authorities' attention. Officer James continued. We also learned that the department flagged your number months ago as a potential misuse risk. Karen felt dizzy. Flagged. Marked. Watched. She was not the powerful watchful eye she believed herself to be. The police had been watching her. And that's when Officer Reed delivered the final blow. Ma'am, after reviewing the video, the statements, and your call history, we are officially issuing you a citation for false reporting. Karen's world shattered. A citation, she whispered. How much? Officer Reed didn't answer. Instead, he handed her a printed notice. Her hands shook as she read it. Her eyes widened. Her breath left her lungs as if she had been punched. This is over $500. Daniel muttered under his breath, could have been worse. She shot him a wounded look. Officer Reed continued, and this is only the first step. Karen blinked, confused. What do you mean first step? Officer James explained. The district attorney will review your case. They may impose additional penalties. They may require mandatory counseling. They may restrict your access to emergency services unless real danger is proven. Karen gasped. No, you can't ban me from calling 911. What if someone breaks into my house? Officer Reed spoke clearly. You will still be able to call. But your calls will go through a verification process. They won't be treated as emergencies unless proven. Karen felt the ground tilt beneath her. Her power gone. Her control stolen. Her voice filtered. Why are you doing this to me? She whispered weakly. Mrs. Henderson stepped forward. We aren't doing anything to you, Karen. You did this to yourself. Karen covered her face with her hands. She sobbed quietly at first, then louder, until her voice echoed in the room. The officers waited patiently. They didn't yell. They didn't rush her. They didn't treat her like a criminal. They treated her like a person who finally had to face the truth. After several minutes, Officer Reed spoke again. Karen, this doesn't have to define you. You can choose to change. You can choose to stop making enemies and start making peace. Karen lowered her hands. Her eyes were red and tired. And what if I fail? She asked. Daniel stepped closer, not with anger, but with sincerity. Then try again, he said. Just stop hurting people to feel safe. Karen stared at him. For the first time, she saw him not as a nuisance. Not as a threat. But as someone she had wronged. And her voice broke. I'm sorry. Daniel nodded slowly. He didn't say he forgave her. Not yet. But he accepted her words. And maybe that was enough for the moment. Officer James cleared his throat. That's everything for tonight. Officer Reed added, we'll contact you both if the district attorney needs more statements. The officers shook Daniel's hand. Mrs. Henderson gave him a warm smile. Then they turned to Karen. She stood small. Defeated. Quiet. Officer Reed handed her a card. Call this number if you want help finding counseling, he said gently. Karen took it with shaking fingers. Thank you, she whispered. Then she left the house slowly, like someone carrying invisible weight. The neighborhood watched her. Not with fear this time, but with a strange mix of relief and sadness. She walked home alone. For the first time in years. She felt the silence of her own house. No noise. No shouting. No anger. Just silence. And inside that silence, something began to change. She wasn't the hero. She wasn't the villain. She was simply someone who finally learned that control is not power. Kindness is. And from that day forward, Karen never called 911 on Daniel again.